This lecture is on René Descartes. Descartes is a French philosopher who was born in 1596 and died in 1650. He is widely known as the father of modern philosophy. With the scientific presuppositions of the past being called into question by the development of modern science, especially with the astronomical studies of Copernicus and Galileo, Descartes set out to provide a firm and lasting foundation for what we can know. In Descartes' work, Meditations on First Philosophy, Descartes gives a commentary on what is referred to in modern philosophy as the mind-body problem, where the mind, or intellect or reason, is something that's immaterial, whereas the body is something that is material. Descartes elaborates on the distinction between the mind and the body in the sixth meditation. Descartes makes a distinction between imagination, which is a faculty of the body, and understanding, which is a faculty of the mind, that demonstrates how our material body and immaterial soul are different. The imagination can easily imagine a triangle, says Descartes. However, we cannot imagine a 1,000-sided figure. And it's even harder for us to imagine the difference between a 999-sided figure and a 1,000-sided figure. However, we can understand the concept of a 1,000-sided figure and understand the difference between a 1,000-sided figure and a 999-sided figure with our mind. Thus, the imagination and the mind are distinct. The imagination is connected to the material body, while the mind is identified with the immaterial soul. Descartes goes on to argue that one can still exist without the imagination, and one can still exist without a material body. Preceding the chapters of Descartes' Meditations on First Philosophy, he says in his dedication letter to the Dean and Doctors of the Faculty of Sacred Theology of Paris that God is knowable through reason, and that the arguments he will use equal or surpass those of geometry when it comes to the level of certitude. Descartes begins his text with the first meditation, where he reflects on the number of falsehoods he has believed throughout his life and seeks to know what can be known with certainty. He thus seeks to reject what he thinks he knows and build up his knowledge on a foundation of certainty. Descartes is utilizing doubt as a method to establish firmness. He is going to demolish everything that he could possibly doubt and start again from the foundations. What Descartes commonly believes is most true has come through his senses. He has believed we can most confidently verify what we can see, taste, touch, smell, and hear. But the senses can deceive. Often when he is dreaming, he believes he is sensing real objects, but the objects are really just part of his dream. He may feel like he is currently awake and sitting by the fire, but he has dreamt he was sitting by the fire before and thought it real while only dreaming. Even universal things like arithmetic and geometry can be doubted. An omnipotent evil deity can make our mathematical beliefs false. Descartes conceives that even the everyday opinions he believes through the senses and mathematics are totally false and presupposes they are committed to him by an evil demon to deceive him. Descartes is seeking what's known as the Archimedean point. Archimedes was an ancient Greek scientist who sought but one firm and immovable point in order to move the entire Earth from one place to another. Descartes' Archimedean point involves finding a firm foundation of certainty to construct what we can know. Descartes, for the sake of the thought experiment to prove what is certain, presupposes what he sees does not exist, that his memory is faulty, that he has no senses and no body, and that extension, movement, and place are mistaken notions. He is putting aside anything that could be doubted, and Descartes begins to wonder if the only certainty is that there is no certainty. Descartes next begins to doubt his own existence. If the physical world can be put into doubt as to whether it exists or not, he wonders, can my own existence be put in doubt, since I am part of the physical world? Descartes says no. While everything else could be called to doubt, his own existence can't be. Descartes comes to the conclusion that to be able to doubt one's own existence, one must truly exist. If I do not truly exist, then I cannot doubt or be misled. In order for an evil demon to deceive me that something is false, I must exist in order to be misled. This moment is known as the cogito. I think, therefore I am. Now that Descartes has found his point of certainty, that he exists, he can now put the world he has taken apart back together based on this point of certainty. With his own existence intact, Descartes next further investigates his own being. What is this I, this me that exists? Everything else about me can be cast into doubt. I can imagine not being able to move. I can imagine not being able to feel. I can imagine not having a material body. So my material body is not essential to me. But what can't be called into doubt is that I think. The reason one cannot doubt that they are thinking is that doubt itself involves thinking. Thinking cannot be separated from us. Descartes believes he can exist without any of the other attributes of himself, like hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, but he can't exist without thinking. He believes he only exists as long as he is a thinking being. Yet while he's essentially a being that thinks and understands and can exist without a body, Descartes believes he's also a being who senses and imagines. He may be dreaming, but he can still imagine things and at least appear to hear and see certain objects, even if those objects aren't what they appear to be. Not only can we not exist without our mind or thinking, the certainty we have about everything we know comes from the mind. Descartes utilizes a wax experiment to demonstrate that certainty comes from our mind, not our senses. Descartes considers what we know about a piece of wax by the senses: its taste, smell, color, shape, hardness, etc. Regarding its smell, it retains some of the scent of the flowers it was collected from. It is hard and cold to touch. It is easy to touch. If you rap it with your knuckle, it will make a sound. When the piece of wax is placed near the fire and melts, the sensible qualities of the wax change. The wax is no longer hard, but soft. The honey flavor has vanished. The scent is gone. Color is changing. The shape has changed. It has become liquid and hot. You could hardly touch it. However, the same piece of wax remains. But how do I know it's still the same wax? Our knowledge that the solid piece of wax and the melted piece of wax are the same cannot have come through the senses. All the sensible properties have changed. Descartes says our knowledge that the solid piece of wax and the melted piece of wax are one and the same came through the intellect, through the mind. It's impossible to come to know what wax is by the senses or imagination alone. Thus, we're able to understand what wax truly is, in all its shapes and sizes, through the mind. The mind is a far better knower than the body, and so we know our mind better than other things that come to us through the body. After all, we may not be perceiving a piece of wax at all. The wax may be a dream or an illusion. Our senses deceive us. However, what is truly knowable for certain is our own existence and our own perceiving of what appears to be a piece of wax. I may be mistaken that a piece of wax is in front of me, but I can't be mistaken that I believe I have the sensation of a piece of wax in front of me. Likewise, I can be mistaken that there is a hand in front of me, but can't be mistaken that I believe I visually sense the perception of a hand in front of me. All clear perceptions we know for certainty come from the intellect alone, not from the senses. The senses are unreliable. In Descartes' third meditation, he argues for the existence of God. Descartes discusses three different sources for our ideas. We have innate ideas that we have had since birth that we did not receive from our experience. We have ideas that come from outside of us, like our idea of a bear, a tree, or a flower. And we have ideas that are invented by us, like unicorns and mermaids. Next, Descartes continues to build on his foundations for his argument for God's existence by talking about how there are objects that have greater reality than other objects. So, for example, God has more reality than a tree. So God can create a tree, but a tree can't create God because God has enough reality, enough power to create the tree, but a tree does not have enough power to create God. No effect can have a greater amount of reality than its cause. There has to be as much reality in the cause as in the effect. The more perfect can't come from the less perfect. So everything that comes into existence must be made by something that is equal or greater amount of reality. So for example, people can make paper dolls, but paper dolls can't make people. Or the example, my parents created me, but I can't create my parents. Now Descartes explicitly gives his argument for God's existence. He says, we have ideas that can originate from our own sensing and imagining, such as our ideas of material objects. All ideas except the idea of God can originate from ourselves. For the idea of God is an idea of an infinite substance, supremely intelligent and infinitely powerful. I am an imperfect being. I can only sense or imagine other finite and imperfect beings due to me being finite and imperfect. The idea of God must have come from a source outside of me, since I cannot sense or imagine something infinite. Therefore, the being that gave me this idea of infinity must himself be infinite. I can only recognize I am finite and limited due to the idea infused in me by God of infinity. An objection that Descartes addresses in his third meditation, pertaining to his argument for God's existence, is that we can conceive of an infinite being on our own through negation. By contemplating finite being and merely understanding perfect being by contrasting the finite with the infinite. Descartes responds, saying we would not understand that we lack something, that we are finite, to begin with unless we were pre-aware of the concept of infinity. We wouldn't recognize ourselves as finite unless we had a notion of the infinite. After establishing his own existence and God's existence, in his sixth meditation, Descartes expands on how the existence of material things are knowable. How do we know that the material world we perceive or even our material body even exists? Consider what is perceived by the senses. I perceive I have a body that exists in the objective world. I perceive this body experiences pain, pleasure, emotion, hunger, etc. I perceive other material objects. While Descartes still has plenty of doubt that material things are the way he is naturally inclined to assume they are, he believes he is now well enough equipped that he need not doubt their existence entirely. Descartes believes we must have a body, as nature teaches that to him more vividly than anything. He believes sense perception comes to him from an outside source. Sense perceptions come to him involuntarily. They are more vivid than the perceptions he consciously creates. Thus, it is not he who creates these sense perceptions. It is only natural that these sensory sensations resemble the objects that they come from. We would be deceived if they came about through other means. Since God is perfect and not a deceiver, because deception is weakness and a form of malice, God would not mislead us into believing there are material objects if there truly are none. Our perception of material objects may not be perfect, but we can at least be certain of those properties that we perceive clearly and distinctly. Now that Descartes has established his own existence, the existence of God, and the existence of the external material world, he summarizes his conclusions on what he, as an individual, is essentially made of. Descartes says he is essentially a thinking being, an immaterial soul that thinks. His body is an extended material object, and the mind is immaterial. It is conceivable of the mind existing apart from the body. Thus the two are distinct, and he can clearly exist without a body. While Descartes believes he can exist as a mind apart from his body, the mind and the body are intermingled to form one unit. We can be quite certain of what was cast into doubt in the first meditation. Descartes began the meditations doubting the reliability of the senses because they have deceived him in the past. He now says the senses are normally quite reliable in helping us get around the world. When in doubt, we can double check with our intellect or memory. Descartes initially was also skeptical of our senses being able to tell us things about the external world because it is possible we could be dreaming and the objects we see do not externally exist. He now says our memory can dispel the doubt presented in the dream argument. Our memories of past waking experiences can help us decipher if we're truly dreaming or not. In dreams, things tend to happen in a disconnected and somewhat random manner.